I'm going to call the meeting to order here. It's 5:32 on August 14th. This is a special select board meeting to talk about stormwater, so you can see, but if you would join me in saying the pledge first, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. Yeah, wanted to welcome everyone. Obviously, we have guests from Montpelier, but also we've got a lot of folks in the crowd who I assume are here from the town as well, and I'm glad you're here. I want to thank Josh Ellerbrock for getting an article out quick out to the messenger so we could try to get some word about this out. But I believe I'm sitting in front of us is Christy Witters, Emily Shelley, and Madeline Russell. Is that correct? Definitely wanted to thank you. And of course, we got Dave Allerton. Stormwater utility, in case you hadn't heard, we created one in St. Albans back, I think it was 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and it passed on a 3-2 vote. We recently had our annual budget come up and it passed on a 3-2 vote. So it's close. And I think part of it is we're trying to figure out, 3 of us sitting up here weren't on the original select board that created the utility. So there's some stuff maybe that was talked about then that maybe we are not aware of. But I think for everybody to have just kind of some more background on what we're looking at, trying to figure out where did it come from? What do we actually need to do and have to do? One big question, I think about St. Albans Bay, 200 yards behind us here, it's green. What kind of a difference if we do everything by 2036? Is it going to make a difference over there? I know that's one big question. I've got 7 or 8 questions. I won't throw them all out right now, other than just, and I assume I understand to be a mandate. Just, when did it come from, or when did it start? Where did it come from? I'll just throw that one out for now, and I'll ask my others. What I would like to do is I'm going to let all of you talk first, give your presentation, take as much time as you'd like. When you're done, we'll see at that point. Select board members may have questions, but we're definitely, after our guests speak, I definitely want to give anyone of the public comment. If you want to come up and make a comment or ask a question, that would be great. As usual, we'll try to limit to 3 minutes, especially with a little bigger audience than normal. And when you come up, obviously just state your name and if you live in St. Albans town or a different town. But otherwise, I'll turn it over to Dave and everyone else from the Agency of Natural Resources. Thank you.
So I want to thank everybody for being here. Stormwater is a big issue in the town that we need to address. And I'm very thankful that we have 3 A&R staff members here to discuss their roles in the stormwater program. And without me saying anything further, I'll just let you do that.
Sure. I'm Christy Witters. I work in the stormwater program. Chip Gianfagna is our stormwater program manager, and the stormwater program is divided into the operational section, the construction program, and the municipal section. And so Emily Shelley and I are here from the municipal section of the stormwater program. And Sam Hughes is also in the municipal section. He joined us online. I've worked in the stormwater program for a while now on a variety of permits, including the MS4, the TS4, which is the MS4 for VTrans, the MSGP, which is an industrial stormwater permit, and the municipal roads permit. And my plan tonight is to go over the MS4 permit requirements and then talk a little bit about the flow restoration plan requirements and phosphorus control plan. And I will pass it to Maddie.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline Russell. I am a 3-acre project developer for our 3-acre stormwater program. I'm here as a representative from the Water Infrastructure Finance Program. Our program manager is Patrick Monks. Program is mainly divided into 3 sections, which is our Clean Water State Revolving Fund, our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and our 3-acre program, which is my area of expertise. Here mainly to talk about what funding opportunities exist. Like I said, I'm most knowledgeable within the 3-acre project realm, but I can talk a little bit about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, as well as a little bit about the MS4 program. So yeah, I'll do my best to answer your questions. I am new with the state. I'm only here for about 4 months. So yes, just to let you know.
Thank you.
And I'm Emily Shelley. I work in the stormwater program with Christy Witters in the municipal section. Doing a lot with sort of TMDL, which are sort of plans to clean up impaired waters, and the requirements around those. So we'll be talking about that and also a little bit about the 3-acre requirement. So find out it all kind of overlaps a bit, so.
Yeah. So I'll go through this presentation and then if there's higher level stuff that I've dived too deep on, definitely, ask those questions. And then I am sure there will be a lot of site specific questions for specific projects that we can address as well. And if we can't answer, all of the site specific questions, we can definitely come back or respond in email for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so tonight, I'm going to go through a presentation that talks about the 4 major requirements of the MS4 permit, which are the minimum control measures, the flow restoration plans, phosphorus control plan, and the municipal road requirements. I'm going to talk a little bit about how these overlap and what St. Albans has already done to really develop a robust MS4 program. And then our more recent permitting requirement, the 3-acre permitting, which is creating a lot of overlap with the MS4s. And I'll get a little bit into that and the opportunities that presents for both funding and addressing phosphorus and flow restoration requirements. All right, so kind of like high level background, the MS4 permit is a federally issued permit that the state of Vermont is delegated to issue. We've been issuing it for a while. I can't remember exactly, back in the early 2000s, I think we started with our first MS4 permit. And the MS4 permit foundation is, I'm jumping ahead. So we're authorized to regulate stormwater discharges from municipal separate storm sewer systems. And those are like what you see in the pictures. They're collected stormwater conveyances in municipalities, typically municipalities that are part of urbanized areas and census tract designated urbanized areas. So that first bullet covers all of the larger municipalities in Vermont, including UVM, VTrans, and the airport. And when we developed the stormwater impaired waters TMDLs, we, instead of creating a separate requirement for all of these municipalities that really had those stormwater impaired waters, we brought that into the MS4 permit so that it would be in a more efficient regulatory mechanism. So that's when St. Albans Town, St. Albans City, Rutland Town, and Rutland City, all of whom have stormwater impaired waters, became MS4 communities. So our current permit term just expired in July, and we just went out on public notice with our latest draft. We're responding to those comments that we received and are planning to issue that next month, and that will be for a 5-year permit term. And it basically continues those same requirements that were in the last MS4 permit. There have been some changes based on feedback from EPA, but that should be issued, and then the town will apply using an NOI form and submitting all of the plans that Dave has prepared.
Can I say,
Oh yeah.
are there only 4 municipal MS4 municipalities? Or
No,
you're just saying
all-
those 4 are the ones that jumped
Oh,
out,
those
or are-
those four were the additionally designated MS4. So they weren't automatically designated because of population. They were additionally designated because of stormwater impaired waters.
Okay, so is that all of them? All the ones that are listed?
Those are all of the MS4s in the state of Vermont.
Okay, just for my understanding. So when we're talking about stormwater, does it only apply to those municipalities or everybody? It's just they have separate categories.
Stormwater applies to everybody. It just depends on what kind of stormwater regulation. And so the MS4 permit just applies to those municipalities and UVM, VTrans, and the airport. there are stormwater regulations for all towns across the state, and that's the municipal roads requirements, the MRGP. And so that's for all of the smaller towns. And so what we did, and I'll get into that a little bit, is instead of requiring the MS4 towns to also have an MRGP permit, we incorporated that into the MS4. So I'll get to that in a minute, but yeah, those are all of the MS4 towns that need to put together stormwater management programs with the things that I'm about to talk about.
Thank you.
All right, so the first part of the MS4 permit, which is the standard component that is, you know, across the country, and all of the MS4 permits are the 6 minimum control measures. And the first 2 are related to public information and education participation. So stenciling storm drains, getting citizens involved in stream monitoring, rain barrel workshops, news articles, flyers with water bills, things like that, to let folks know about stormwater regulations and the part that they can play. The third minimum control measure is the illicit discharge detection and elimination program. And that's looking for illicit connections to the system to make sure that there aren't accidental sewer pipes plumbed into the storm system. There aren't, you know, just uncontrolled flows from a site. So it requires a program of inspecting during dry weather all of the stormwater outfalls to make sure that there aren't nasty things coming out of them. Number 4 is the construction site runoff control minimum control measure. And that's similar to the state's CGP. We have the construction general permit. So if there's over an acre of disturbance, we issue a construction general permit. So there is overlap there with the state's construction permit, but this minimum control measure requires that, you know, municipalities stay on top of those earth disturbances within their municipality and make sure that, you know, if someone's coming in for a zoning permit, that they're aware that they may need a construction general permit from the state. The 5th minimum control measure is the post-construction runoff control. And this is for stormwater control once impervious surface has been developed. So it's looking at, you know, anything from infiltration to rain gardens to gravel wetlands. And again, here, there is an overlap with the state's program. We have the operational permit. So if someone constructs over half an acre of impervious surface, which is our new threshold, there is a requirement to treat that stormwater before it discharges to the MS4 or to a waterway. So the post-construction minimum control measure for the MS4s really looks at anything that's not covered by our state program. So I haven't read the town of St. Albans stormwater ordinance recently, but it looks at, you know, if you are developing any new impervious below that half acre threshold, there are things that you can do. You can sheet flow into grass. You can put in a rain garden. But it's a very small area, that the small jurisdictional threshold, because the state covers the rest. And then the final one is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This really looks at street sweeping, maintenance of, you know, public works vehicles, de-icing, all of those things that the municipality does, looking at what they can do to prevent additional pollution and maintaining those operations for the municipality. Before you jump to the next slide, just go back right there. So this little image is a screenshot from your website. You guys have an amazing website that's current, that has all sorts of resources. Just so that everybody's aware, it is a really good resource to find the latest stormwater management program for the town, which is called that SWIMP down there. And then there are other links to the flow restoration plan, the phosphorus control plan, and it's really a wealth of information. So I just wanted to commend you guys because, you know, a lot of municipalities, it's hard to keep up with the website updates. So there are a lot of good resources there. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about, so we talked about the minimum control measures, which are kind of the basic requirements for the MS4 permit. And like I said, when we issued the stormwater TMDLs, which are TMDLs because there's too much stormwater hitting streams too fast. And we need to reduce that flow, slow it down so it's not gouging out those stream banks. So when we issued those stormwater TMDLs, we designated those 4 additional towns, St. Albans, City, Rutland, City, and Town. And so in St. Albans, you're part of the Rugg and Stevens Brook watersheds, and those are both impaired for stormwater. There's too much flow hitting those brooks too fast. And so for the Rugg, this is the Rugg Brook delineation of that watershed, and it requires a 15.3% reduction in that high flow. And so what that means is practices need to be put in to help slow that flow down. So a detention basin or a gravel wetland or infiltration, something to help it infiltrate or slow down before it hits the stream, because all of that impervious, it used to just hit the ground and infiltrate, but now we've got this impervious and it runs off and hits the stream. It's probably 2 permit terms ago that the flow restoration plan requirement came into effect.
Yeah, I think,
Emily.
yeah, I think the requirement came into effect 2012 and the town submitted their flow restoration plan. They did it in concert with the city and V-Trans, since they're all contributors to the stream, and that was approved, I think, in 2018, either end of 2017 or early 2018. So that's been in effect for about 5 years now, and it's a 20-year plan. So there's some time with these bigger implementation plans to do it, but you know, we're already 5 years into it too.
Yeah. And so in that flow restoration plan, there are a list of projects. So the consultants looked at the models, looked at opportunities within the watershed. Maybe it's upgrading existing practices, finding new practices. And so that is a list. I'm not sure if there are additional ones, but
I think it was a partial list.
okay.
We have a copy of the flow restoration on our website. It may be on the website as well, would be a better resources, but just an example of some of the things that are included there, and sort of like the purple and orange areas on the map are areas that are draining to, you know, practices that were called out in that plan.
And the next slide is the other stormwater impaired watershed, the Stevens Brook. So similar to the last slide, this one has a higher reduction that needs to be achieved, a 24.3% reduction in the high flow. 23% of that is attributed to the town, because this is, you know, a lot of the city's infrastructure. So they're also implementing practices to address their contributions. So the next, and I should have, yeah, so I prefaced the flow restoration plans. We added those as an MS4 permit requirement, you know, for efficiency, for regulatory permitting. And then when the Lake Champlain TMDL was issued, the agency was, you know, required to come up with a plan for how we're going to implement EPA's TMDLs. And one of the tools that we used is the MS4 permit. And I'll go through maybe on the next slide a little bit about how we've divided up the responsibility. But So there is the phosphorus control plan that is part of the MS4 permits now. And it requires phosphorus reductions from municipally owned lands. And so those would be like this building and municipal roads. And then 3-acre sites that are incorporated into the MS4 permit. And so that's, you know, really an opportunity, and I'll go through some of the permits that the MS4 has incorporated in a bit. So the town is given a target to reduce, and then their 20 years, I think it was 2036, to reduce by, is that correct, 2036?
I think that's our year.
Okay.
Yeah, the TMDL was issued
Okay.
in 2016.
Can you just remind me, TMDL?
Total maximum daily load. So. So the St. Albans Town phosphorus control plan was approved this year. And that plan has proposed to meet that flow or that phosphorus reduction target through some of those existing flow restoration practices that you've already identified through those flow restoration plans, which is actually, you know, one of the benefits of having those flow restoration plans already in place is that some projects have been identified on the landscape of really efficient practices and places where there can be upgrades. And Milton is the one MS4 that does not have a flow restoration plan. They don't have a stormwater impaired water. So in a way, they're starting kind of at the ground level and starting to look at practices. So that's an advantage, that flow restoration plan projects can also count towards phosphorus reduction. If they're, you know, designed in a way, they may need to be changed from the previous design, but that's something good, that those projects can count for both TMDLs. There are also additional structures that have been proposed, and then the municipal road fixes. So I think the next slide, I'll get into the municipal road requirements. Oh no, this is just some of the phosphorus control plan projects that are in your phosphorus control plan. And so the consultants, you know, reviewed all of the opportunities across the landscape and ranked all of those projects based on, you know, space, feasibility, cost, maybe location near municipal infrastructure, if there could be that partnership between the municipality and the private landowners. And so these are kind of the ones that are at the top of the list. You can see all of those little bubbles across the landscape. And the last column there in this slide shows the stormwater permits. And those are stormwater permits that our agency has issued to these individual homeowners associations or property owners for their impervious surface. And a lot of those permits, or some of them, are 3-acre sites that now need to upgrade. And so there's a real kind of a nexus between the municipal infrastructure that may go through those properties, and then the old stormwater permits issued by our agency needing to upgrade, and that kind of opportunity to look at what was that treatment practice and how do we take advantage of that. And so this is the municipal road requirements. And so the municipal road requirements are, it's like the MRGP, the Municipal Road General Permit. Those requirements were also added to the MS4 permit for efficiency, so that we didn't have, you know, again, multiple permits and regulations for the MS4s. So there is a requirement that municipalities conduct road erosion inventories for all of their hydrologically connected roads. And if erosion is present, upgrade to the municipal road standards. And what this graph is showing, with this table and these charts are showing, is that St. Albans is doing a really good job in upgrading those segments that weren't meeting the state standards. And all of this can be found on our website. And then just a little bit about the municipal road standards. Our municipal roads permit was really designed, as a maintenance program. So looking at how municipal roads should be maintained and nothing too out of the ordinary. So the municipal road standards include making sure that the road is properly crowned so that there's not, erosion going down the middle of the road, that there isn't a greater berm on the edges of the road so that the water can sheet flow off. Depending on the slope of the road, looking at the types of material that are in the roadside ditch, whether that's grass lined, if it's a low slope or larger stone to really help that flow slow down and prevent erosion. So it's really maintenance practices that road foremen are very familiar with, and making sure those are implemented in the right places. Let's see. Okay, so what we've talked about are those main components of the MS4 permit, the minimum control measures, and then those three sections that we've incorporated into the MS4, the flow restoration plans, phosphorus control plans, and municipal road requirements. And, as an agency, and you can click forward, as an agency, we've been delegated to come up with strategies for the Lake Champlain phosphorus TMDL. So two of those, the phosphorus control plan and the municipal road requirements, are part of our strategy to address the phosphorus TMDL. The other is the TS4 permit. And then there are these 3-acre permitting requirements. And while they're not directly part of the MS4 permit, there is that opportunity for the municipalities to partner with those private parcels that may need a 3-acre permit. So 3-acre permitting applies to properties with greater or equal to 3 acres of impervious that never had a stormwater permit because they developed that impervious prior to our stormwater permitting authority, or it's a pre-2002 permit. There are certain standards that those sites need to come up to meet. So treating water quality volume for half of the site. And if you're in a stormwater impaired water, also achieving that channel protection, that holding the stormwater back for 75% of the site. And so some of these properties, have older stormwater permits that don't have big treatment systems on them, or modern day treatment systems, and some of them never had a permit. A lot of them do have municipal infrastructure that goes through them. So I think the next slide shows kind of a diagram of how there is this 3-acre MS4 permit overlap. So we could have the town road, which is regulated under the MS4 permit, but it's also part of this 3-acre site, which is this, homeowners association that includes the homes and the roads for that development. And so we designed this as an opportunity for the MS4s to work with those municipalities and, incorporate that permit. So it's no longer solely the residence permit, but it becomes part of the MS4 and combining forces to implement those practices that are required to meet those treatment standards. It does that last sentence. So MS4s can take over those permits, but then it does increase that target that we set for the MS4 to reduce phosphorus, but it's fair for those 3-acre sites.
Can I just ask a question? So if I'm not mistaken, our target is 69 kilograms a year.
That sounds right.
So if we took over that last thing, if we took one over, does that mean that goes to 70 or does that mean that goes down to 67? If you know what I mean?
It goes up.
Okay.
It goes up.
Gotcha.
I will say about half, the town has already taken over several permits, and that 69 already includes that load from several sites, and, you know, it's based on a load calculation based on how much impervious that site has and how big it is, so.
So 69 kilograms is our current number right now. Right. Thank you.
You know, we have sort of what we call loading rates based on, you know, sort of standard amount of phosphorus per acre of impervious surface, you know, your roofs, your parking lots, the roads, and so it's a calculation basically based on so many kilograms per acre of that. And so when you're taking over a site, if the town decides to take over a site, they're adding, they would have to do a calculation based on how much area is in this subdivision, and then times our loading rate, that amount of phosphorus per acre, and then it gets added to that total. And the 35% just comes to, it's roughly equivalent to what we would expect that site to achieve if they were going it on their own. So we're just trying to keep it equal, because our programs, the phosphorus control plans, the municipal roads, either the permit or the requirements in the MS4 and the 3 acres permitting combined pretty much gets us to our part. I call it our part, the developed plans portion of the overall TMDL target. There are other parts of that target that are for wastewater treatment plants or agriculture or forestry. So we're not shouldering the burden alone, but it's quite a bit of work to even get our piece of the pie.
It's complicated, you're saying.
Yes, but just don't, we're not only, you know, impervious surfaces aren't the only thing that are being regulated in order to meet these overall targets and try to clean up the lake.
And I think this might be my last slide. You know, talking about, you know, those permits, this is a list of the permits that the town has currently incorporated into the MS4. And, you know, late in the day today, I went through these permits and was looking at like, oh, which ones are addressed in the PCP, which ones are in the FRIP. And I think that first column, all the 1 and 2 dash numbers, those are really old stormwater permits. I think all of those may be part of the flow restoration plans, but I didn't look into the flow restoration plans. But the ones that are highlighted are part of the phosphorus control plan. And then in that second column, we also have some that are part of the phosphorus control plan that are 3 acre sites that the municipality may have infrastructure within. And then there is the industrial park that was part of the flow restoration plan. So the concept here is that there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of requirements, and we're trying to combine those for the towns in one kind of comprehensive plan, the SWIMP plan, where we can look at these 3 acre requirements, look at the ground and try to come up with the best strategy for, you know, a comprehensive plan where we get the most bang for the buck on all these projects if we're working together. That's the concept. And as it starts to roll out, we run into all of these issues as to why we're here tonight. And I think this might be my last slide. Yes. So I hope that that gave an overview of kind of the MS4 permit. We can definitely talk about some of those specific projects and hopefully try to answer those. Emily definitely is our expert on some of that. And we can definitely, you know, answer what we know off the top of our heads and then write down any questions that we get. And then Madeline has a slide about funding opportunities. So I'll turn it over.
So what do you want next?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yep. Well, thanks, Christy. So going off that, the first main area that's going to affect these projects is the ARPA 3 acre program. Again, that's my program. That's my contact up there. I'd be the contact for this program. My day-to-day within this role is basically building and maintaining projects that help assist with landowners affected by the 3 acre rule. So it's different funding opportunities split across 4 projects. This funding comes through the American Rescue Plan Act. Just want to note that as it is federal dollars, so it does give us some requirements in terms of granting and makes things a little more complicated. The main thing that I want to highlight here is our upcoming permit obtainment assistance program. This program is going to be open to all 3-acre sites as long as they are not state or federally owned properties or large businesses. To be considered a small business entity, will have to register with sam.gov, attesting that they are a small business to be a participant in this program. But like I said, this should be open to most of our 3-acre sites. And right below there, at the bullet, is our permit obtainment assistance formula, meaning how much money each site is eligible to get. This will be a $240 permit admin processing fee across the board. Then it's going to be $860 multiplied by the number of permitted impervious acres on that site, plus up to $30,000 in engineering fees. Overall, this payment cannot exceed over $49,999. This is, again, for tax considerations. With it being federal money, we have to keep it as a beneficiary payment. So that's going to be open to all of our sites. We also foresee eventually doing a construction assistance program. That program is likely only going to be open to our highest need residential sites. So that's going to be extremely competitive, and that program is also in its earliest stages of conception. So I mainly would want to highlight this permit obtainment assistance program is going to be the best bet for all of the 3-acre sites. Currently, this program should likely be opening hopefully in the next month or two. We're currently just finalizing some of the online infrastructure for our application portal to ensure it's accessible for everyone who needs to apply. We're also making some slight structural tweaks to ensure we consider all tax, legal, and payment issues that might arise. But that's going to be, your best bet for all of our 3-acre sites. Outside of that, we have our Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Our contact for this program is Tom Brown. He is a much greater expert on this program than I am, so I'd highly recommend reaching out to him if you have any questions in the future. I would assume this is one of our older funding opportunities, so I would assume the board might be familiar with it. For the public, just to say our SRF basically provides low to no interest loans to waste and stormwater design and construction projects. For categories like preliminary engineering and final design, it's a 0% loan over 5 years. Construction projects, it's a 2% administrative fee that applies to the entire loan as a package. The kicker here is whether or not there'd be subsidy available. And when I say subsidy, I mean principal loan forgiveness. So the main considerations I want to highlight here is there's no subsidy left in this current state fiscal year, which I assume you may be aware of.
That was in FY23, right?
Yes.
FY24, so we got new stuff.
So, yep. So the new intended use plan just recently closed for public comment. Once that intended use plan is finalized, which we foresee being around the end of August or early September, the new planning subsidy will kick in. So there will be new planning subsidy available for 3-acre projects with a municipal sponsor. And I just do want to say that funding determination and eligibility is on a project by project basis. So I can't speak to what would and wouldn't be eligible, but I will just say that there is subsidy available. It is competitive. So I would, if you want to compete for that, think about doing it in early September and reaching out to Tom Brown as early as possible. And then finally, the MS4 granting program, our contact there is Gianna Petito. In short, I believe the town already received an MS4 grant. The program's currently designed as a one-time funding opportunity. We hope future support it's likely to be designed as a loan forgiveness program similar to the SRF, but that's still to be determined. So currently the official statement is that it's designed to be a one-time funding opportunity at this time. Yeah, those are our main things that we offer. We do understand that this is a pretty big lift for communities, and we're doing what we can with the funding we have. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to field them, or if I can't answer them, bring them back to my team for feedback, and I can bring answers to Dave following the meeting.
Okay. Any other slides or any other information to share at this time?
No, we're open to questions.
Okay, what I think I'll do is I'm gonna go over and have select board members ask some questions.
So I got a question. Can you go back to that slide of our projects here?
There were 15 of them, I think.
You know, the one with all the different developments.
It was near the end.
Yeah, it might be the last slide.
last slide.
I don't like doing this. Which one?
Is that it?
There we go. Yep.
Well, so our problem, or my question and our problem. We've been collecting stormwater fees. Every parcel in the town. We got a small pile of money. We got some money from the state. So I can pick out 2 or 3 of them projects up there and the money's gone. So how long? How many years is it gonna take? And some of those are $500,000, $750,000 projects. And the problem with some of our citizens are having, and a lot of them is, we're going into these private developments and fixing their stormwater, which wasn't an issue when they were built. And how are we ever gonna get ahead? And is it fair to ask our taxpayers that aren't in these systems to fund private development repairs on their stormwater system? And the rules keep changing, like you said, that you're in 5 years and we're not, we got 20 more years. So, you know, when I started, I used to be on the DRB 20, 30 years ago, and we did some of these developments, there was no rules. You know, you stick your road in, you had some ditches, all you worried about was the septic system. Now they're coming back and saying, well, you gotta have this done, that done. There's no way we're ever gonna get ahead. You know, even if we doubled or tripled our fees, what do we do? And it's this, I mean, you were saying you're not sure about the money. I mean, we gotta have some help from the state, these things here, because when we approved them all, the homeowners associations were supposed to collect money to take care of their roads, and nobody ever did it. So now they're coming to us saying, help us out. And we gotta be fair to all our taxpayers.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a question in
Yeah.
In
a
a statement,
so
I hear you.
I'm willing to hear anything you got to say that make me feel good when I walk out the door.
Yeah, I don't think I can totally make you feel good, but I mean, I do understand that, and I wish that we had, known about some of these problems when I wish that the science around stormwater existed back in the day, but what we've learned is that we need to detain and infiltrate that stormwater because it is a contributor to, phosphorus in the lake and the deterioration of smaller streams. I think we try to set up the plans so that they have a long implementation schedule to address the impact of the magnitude of implementing these practices on all of these sites. We've set that at 20 years. That's, part of our negotiations with EPA in trying to set a reasonable timeframe. There are, right now that is the timeframe for St. Albans and for the rest of the communities. I will say that the city of Burlington is putting together an integrated permit looking at, the cost of wastewater improvements because they have a lot of combined sewer overflows into the lake. And the cost of the MS4 permit and, all of their infrastructure, and then comparing that to their tax base and coming up with maybe a different time frame for implementation. So if that is, something that St. Albans is facing, like it's really just impossible to meet this within the 20 years. And we see that. Let's have that conversation about how do we come up with a schedule that's reasonable, because we all want to implement these things because we want to clean up the lake. And we know that it's important to have these projects in the ground. And we are really trying to work together to come up with the most efficient way to do that. And so while I can't speak to stormwater utilities specifically, it's not something that we do in our program. I am familiar with them enough to understand that it is the best thing for a community because we all use the lake, we all use the beaches, and it does kind of share that cost of retrofitting development for a municipality. It also leverages the town's ability to get additional grants so that we can focus on where those problems are, or the town can focus on where those problems are.
My problem is, in the next 20 years, what's EPA gonna come up with, where we've gone and fixed 3 or 4 of those, and all of a sudden it's not good enough. Then we're right back to square one.
That's true. There could be additional issues for sure. One thing that we're seeing here is we had those flow restoration plan requirements with the stormwater impaired waters because of that gush of flow from the impervious surface. And a lot of those practices are working for the phosphorus plans. So I can't say the next impairment can be treated with these improvements, but as we start to look at stormwater and how we better manage it, hopefully we're preventing those additional impacts in the future. I think that's where we're at right now. And you're right that more things will come down the pike, and hopefully we'll be in a position to address them, and we'll be in a better position than we were 10 years ago.
I hope so.
Yeah.
For all of them to grow.
Well, I have just a litany of questions, but, so for the taxpayers, for the town, like, is there any way to get some sort of assurance that a $500,000 project is not gonna be, 3 years? So permitting process, every 5 years you update your permit, the general permit, I'm assuming for that, and changes get made in that permit every 5 years, depending on whatever's going on in Washington or wherever. But is there any way that the town could get assurances, like say if we go in and put a $500,000 in Tanglewood, okay, you guys are good for 40 years. You're not gonna have to mess with that. You guys put the money in, everyone stepped up. You don't need to touch that. No matter what changes, you don't touch that for 40 years. Or whatever that time frame is, rather than they could just be putting down, they could seed that down, get grass growing around the pond or whatever, and 2 weeks later, some change happens and you're back to needing more money put into it. That, to me, that's just, that's a terrible way to spend money.
Yes. That is.
So, and I feel like that's kind of where we're at, and so that's one thing to think about. Like, if there is a way to get some sort of assurance that money invested was gonna have some kind of a usable lifespan, operation and maintenance plan for 30 years, as long as you follow it, you're good. No matter what happens, you won't even get looked at for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So that way you can do work feeling confident that you're taking care of the problem, at least for the time that we're around,
Yeah.
So that's one question I had.
Can I respond to it
Yep,
before I
sure.
forget?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's, not a surprise that I can't give you like a stamp, right? But, I will say that a lot of those like 1 and 2 dash projects are like 40-year-old projects. And we're now coming back to them to say, those weren't designed to the standards that we understand. But those were very old projects. And, while there's not an assurance that you spend $1 million on a project today, that there isn't going to be a required change, I don't anticipate that in the next 5-10 years. We did just do a major overhaul to address the Lake Champlain TMDL, and these are significant changes to our regulations and our thresholds, like the 3 acre, going back to sites that were 3 acres of impervious that never had a permit. That's, totally brand new. And I don't anticipate any major changes like that in the near future. And then, you know, as federal regulations change and we need to, you know, address those in our permits, the state of Vermont really does try to work with our municipalities and really hear those concerns and push back on EPA. And we're doing that right now with the MS4 permit, going back and forth. So while it might not be perfect, no, we're trying to be reasonable.
Yeah, I hear it. I have another question about, you mentioned the TMDL for Lake Champlain, and you also said that the MS4 permit is for stream bank erosion to slow the water, so we don't cut up the streams,
Yes, the flow restoration plans.
the flow
for
restoration plans.
Stevens and
Is there
Rogers.
any, if 23% of the problem in Lake Champlain, the phosphorus problem, is from stream bank erosion, is there any plans by the state or ANR to actually address stream bank erosion? Because if you go up the Lamoille, you go anywhere with these floods, the first thing in the news articles I see is farm pollution is causing the problem. And I can show you pictures of river channels that have doubled in size, gouged out. Managing the stream banks is, leaving the stream banks alone is not managing the stream banks. And so what we're doing here is all the MS4 stuff is so that we don't have to manage the stream banks. At some level, wouldn't it make sense to invest money in managing the stream banks for these two small brooks? I mean, if that's instead of doing everything over here, just address the problems in the brook without just planting trees on the bank, like fix stuff, shores things up. I understand speeds water up, I get all that. But at some point, why don't we just address that? Like, even for the whole TMDL for the lake. I've talked to all kinds of water people. They say it's gonna reach an equilibrium in 20 years, but that's foolishness. That's not gonna happen. So anyways, I guess it's a
Yeah.
comment or a question about stream bank erosion. Like, if that is the problem, why don't we address it in the stream instead of addressing it everywhere else but the stream? Just a thought.
Yeah, and before I forget
Yeah.
that, I definitely can't speak to, you know, it's a little bit out of the stormwater programs regulatory realm, talking about,
Well, we're talking about the TMDL, right?
Right.
That's what's driving all this.
right. And so what we can do from the stormwater perspective is try to reduce that flow of stormwater so that those streams can become more stable. I think that that's maybe the first piece in helping those stream banks to become more stable. And then there definitely has to be a restoration. I can definitely look into that. Does sound like, you know, I can look into that in our agency and find out if there's somebody else who can provide more.
That'd be fine. Another comment I guess I have, or question I have, is that if we're diverting all this water, we want the water to infiltrate. I mean, I know there's issues going on with water coming off the airport, going into the Winooski River that shouldn't be going in the Winooski River. What are those contaminants gonna do to our groundwater that we're trying to make it go into the ground? I think once it's in the groundwater, it's gonna be a lot harder to fix than it is gonna be to fix otherwise. I just think like we need to be careful about how we're approaching this stuff, and before we go out and spend a whole lot of money trying to do this, we better make sure that we understand what unintended consequences of doing that are. And that's just a comment. I'm not saying anything bad is going on, but I'm saying when that stuff gets into the groundwater around St. Albans, people will be very upset.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
those are.
Wouldn't we be better? I mean, if you look at these developments, a lot of them are on the upper side of town. We talked about this over the years. Rather than spend a lot of money, like we saw in the last, early in July when you had all that rain, some of these places got swamped. Wouldn't we be better to put a large retention ponds that caught all that water from the interstate and the hills and stopped it before it got into these developments and let it go out slowly there rather than going and put $500,000 in every one of them and not really do anything because, you know, some of these are built out and you got issues with the right of ways and, you know, permission to get on people's land. I mean, you're talking nightmares in some of these developments. I mean, in my mind, you'd be better off to stop the water before it got into town. My pet peeve is that when they put in Interstate 89, which you'd never be able to build today if you tried to build it. It goes through my farm. Put a dam across the bottom of that hill where all the water used to just flow down. So they put dam across that hill and then they got culverts. Takes that water from the road ditches, puts it all in one spot, shoots it out like a shotgun right down on St. Albans Dam. You know, and that's something that's almost impossible to fix at this point in time.
Brian. I'm our youngest board member, but I've been on the board the longest. Other than Jack, who did a stint in the early and mid 2000s and then came back to us in retirement later in life.
I'm still questioning.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I got on the planning commission in 2016 and we were deep into planning that FRP and everything that was submitted in 2017-18 timeframe. Got on the select board in 2017, remained on the planning commission for almost 3 years. I've been here through the initial stage of taking this seriously through implementing the utility. When the ordinance passed, it was a 3-2 vote. I was the chair. I was the tiebreak vote. And the reason I voted to implement the utility, other than the fact that it provides more of a cost burden onto those who have large amounts of impervious surfaces like commercial and industrial users and takes cost burdens off of, you know, folks on fixed incomes. It's because we've got people who live in communities or neighborhoods that are essentially built in drainage basins for the interstate. And that's what Jack's alluding to. I've got a bunch of people that I recognize from the audience who could show you videos of their flooded basements, water pouring down their ditches and up into their streets. And it's water that comes off the interstate. And that's part of it. The other part of it was that it was supposed to be a start at cleaning up the lake. It was supposed to be an earnest effort to designate public funds to clean up the lake. Governor Scott signed Act 76 ceremoniously right over at the Bay Park. We had Treasurer Pierce, who touted that she'd found $60 million per year for a number of years to help municipalities clean up impaired waterways. I thought the cavalry had arrived then, and that the funds would start to flow, and that this would be something that would turn into a how are we going to pay for it to how are we going to build it so fast to spend all this money. The cavalry's still not here. We're collecting $400,000 to $500,000 a year off of private businesses and homeowners to pay for these designated problems that we've listed that in a lot of ways were caused by the state. And we aren't receiving an appropriate amount of funding every year to share in, you know, these mitigation efforts. We're designating huge amounts of staff time. You know, David is a very valuable member of our team. He spends a lot of time every day in these acronyms and these pieces of paperwork and this litany of bureaucratic jargon that I don't fully understand, even though I've been here long enough that I should understand it. We've submitted, you know, just to pick out Tanglewood, we had a design complete to rectify, it was supposed to rectify that whole neighborhood, which is one of the most abhorrent stormwater impaired areas in the whole town. We got a grant for $200,000. We thought the project was going to cost about $200,000. We went out to bid and the lowest bid was $400,000. We had to give the grant money back. We applied 2 more times subsequently, if my memory serves me correct, and we didn't receive it. either time at the new threshold. We then, just last week, we had a meeting and I talked to Dave afterwards about, how a lot of water we found was running, through that large storm down from the interstate through Tanglewood. And I asked him, is that new design that we have ready to go, that we're ready to put out for an RFP as soon as the funding's figured out, is that designed to handle all that load? And the answer is no. So now I've got to go to Kevin Briggs, wherever he is, the head of the Tanglewood Homeowners Association, and tell him that that project's not going to get built again this year. And it's going to go back to design for a third time. And we're going to have to design it to handle all of this state water. And it's not a good conversation to have when people who live on, maybe the other side of the Tanglewood retention pond that's not sized appropriately or maintained correctly, who say, hey, every time it rains more than an inch, my basement floods with overflow water that runs down from the top of that pond bank into my backyard and into my foundation, and my drain can't handle it, backs up my sub pump, and then all of a sudden my basement's flooded. It doesn't help people who live half a neighborhood over, 4 houses in a row, that say they're having significant issues with their in-ground septic systems. So my question is, how much bureaucratic nonsense do we have to go through to get to the point where the money will flow into our hands so we can actually do this work and get it done? And then to Jeff's point, will it be enough? Or is there no point to any of it? I mean, the only reason that I continue to support the stormwater utility is because of neighborhoods like Tanglewood, that have extreme amounts of stormwater that run right through, they plug up, their infiltration devices aren't sized appropriately, their conveyance devices aren't sized appropriately, it backs up into the street, literally, it floods basements, it overflows sub pump, it's not good. Where's the money? And we're raising 400,000. Here's another point I had that I don't want to forget to touch on. I don't mean to be disorganized, but we raised an amount of money from farmers. Our stormwater utility manual has the largest credit available for agricultural users or farms, and out of any of the 7 other utilities in the state. We did that on purpose, but we needed to collect some amount of money from farms because they have large barns, they have a lot of roadways, and they convey a lot of stormwater. Secretaries Moore and Tebbets had a dropout argument between Senate Natural Resources and Senate Ag over exempting farms from paying stormwater fees to municipal utilities. And Secretary Tebbets won, and it blew 18% roughly hole in our stormwater utility budget. So I have 18% less money than I had last year to operate on, and we have probably 18% more regulations in play with this new 5-year MS4. And it just feels like the state always is like right here with their hand on their back saying, you're gonna do it, we're gonna get you the funds. Their hand's not on our back, it's on the handle of a blade. I'm really, really frustrated that we continue to raise fees. People are smart. They realize that this isn't going to clean up the lake. We're not going to build all those projects and the lake's magically not going to be green in July and August. Like our chair alluded to, this has been 3-2 out of the gate. And that third vote is withering on the vine. If we don't come up with, Act 76 at $60 million a year. Why not give $1 million a year to each of the 7 MS4 communities that implement utilities with no questions asked? You get $1 million a year. I've asked that question before. You know what we get? Well, we give you $25,000 a year for having an MS4. And then we finally get a shot in the arm. We're getting about $400,000 or so in one-time ARPA funding, but it's one time, like Madeline said, it's one-time funding. We're looking at spending significant amounts of money for the next 13 years. And we can't afford to raise it on the backs of these good people in our businesses. I talk to people that have leases in our shopping centers. Their CAMs went up abhorrently as this utility fee was implemented. It gets passed on directly to the businesses. Homeowners on fixed incomes expected to pay an extra $50 a year for something that really has nothing to do with them because they're on a state road with no stormwater permit whatsoever. I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do. I thought we were fighting the good fight and doing God's work, and that the state would be there with essentially a blank check to help pay for all this, since it's only 7 communities designated with an MS4 status. And the best we get is maybe a revolving loan, or we'll give you 25 grand this year and hopefully next year. And here's a shot in the arm from the federal government, but it's a one-time deal. I mean, it's not a long-term solution. And I get that you folks are trying to do the best you can with what you have. So I don't know who we need to talk to pass this message along to, that it's not enough. You folks are not given enough money to delegate. And quite honestly, I prefer that the money came straight from the treasurer's office directly to the utility, and that we could spend it as long as we were within the guidelines of a plan that you approved. I don't know how we get to that point. If we have an MS4 that's meeting your criteria and it's been approved, we should receive significant amounts of money. I, for one, think it should be a 2-to-1 match. If we raise 500,000 in utility fees, we should get $1 million from the state, no questions asked, on top of other rounds of additional grant opportunities. Because these issues aren't gonna solve themselves. That list of projects, that's in 2016, 2017, that was ballparked at 5 million. Today, 15, all day long. And we've got 13 years to do it. And we're raising 500,000 a year. Sorry, about 400,000 a year after the administration blew a hole by exempting farms and provided no backfill. So those are my comments. I mean, I'm sorry it wasn't it was such a long form and not in the form of more questions. I've got well over 200-300 hours of my life into this, and I feel more confused than I did the first hour. And it's a very frustrating feeling. I can't imagine how the folks in the audience who have basements that flood, and they bought a home, and then years later they get a letter from the town saying, hey, you have a stormwater permit that hasn't been kept to date. It was never renewed. We need to include you in our MS4. We need to meet with you. You need to form an HOA that you've never had yet just to deal with this problem. And they look at us and say, oh, I didn't know we had a stormwater permit. No one notified them. It's not in their permits, and it's not state law that someone has to review a decision letter from a DRB or receive a copy of every state issued permit. It's a mess. And these folks are here. They have no idea what they bought into. And they're being told, okay, you need a $400,000 treatment device, and the town might help pay for it. Maybe if the state helps us pay for some of it, hopefully. It's a scary scenario, and eventually it's going to start creating title defects. So if there are any comments that you pass along to Secretary Moore or other members of the administration, it is, we need a serious amount of money. We need it yesterday, and we need it directly. It shouldn't be through the form of grant funding opportunities that we are highly competitive for and that we may or may not get. It should be, okay, here's your plan. You've got it mapped out. You're going to get $1 million a year, whatever it is. Use it, go get these projects constructed, and let's work hand in hand to get this done by 2036. If we're not going to do that, then what's the point? So thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Anyone want to respond or start at point 1?
Let me go back. I hear you. I think that the best thing that I can do is definitely go back to my program and my division chief and express that sentiment to them directly. I think you guys do have a really good program. I think you guys are really working hard with your flow restoration plans, your phosphorus control plans, and I think that you're, demonstrating that you're trying to meet all of the requirements. And I do hear the burden and the issues of V-Trans water coming onto private properties. Dave mentioned that to me as well. And that's something that, I can reach out to V-Trans to talk about in coming up with a solution for that. But for the money piece, I can definitely bring that up my chain of command.
I think it's a broad conversation that has to be had with Secretary Moore, Treasurer Pichek, and Governor Scott. They need to be made to understand what the actual ground game looks like for these 7 communities. We've been given tens of millions of dollars to work on in a very short amount of time. in the public sectors, speaking, maybe in the private sector, we'd have a shot at getting this done, but definitely not in government unless we get a huge shot in the arm regularly every year that we can dependably plan on. And it should have an inflation factor with it too. They came to town, $60 million. He signed the bill right in front of us with 50 other elected and appointed state officials behind it. And I thought the cavalry was here and that something like that would happen. I never in my life thought that we'd have to come up with raising all of this money on the back of private people. This is a public problem. And there's only 7 of us in the state so far. Maybe that'll expand someday as the EPA expands its ever-changing guidelines. But right now there's only 7. $1 million a year would quite literally triple the amount of money that we have in our pockets right now to solve this problem. So whatever we can do to get to the point where we're having a real discussion with the legislature about just put it in a capital bill, just delegate it, get it over with. If we are serious about getting this done, we want to meet these targets. We need to shift focus from where's the money going to come from to how are we going to spend it fast enough. I mean, you talk with people like in the railroad right now, there's more federal money available for rail than at any other point in our history, is what I'm hearing. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that has to be spent by a certain date or they claw it back. I would love to have that problem. Please create that problem for us.
I just wanted to, it kind of piggybacks with that. And this is because this isn't the first time we talked about stormwater utility and how to spend the money, right? I thought there was 11 projects. It looks like maybe there's 15. I think it's kind of consensus if we're going to do a project next to probably Tanglewood, right? So it might be our biggest, most expensive one. And one of the things that I'm trying to grapple with too, and this is the hard part is because the state or federal part is literally unknown, is what we're doing on the next few projects in terms of how much the town is putting in or the neighborhood and the state and federal is setting a precedent, right, on how much that's gonna happen. So my fear is that, we use the wrong percentage, we'll say, on the first few projects. We get a lot of state and federal money and we put a lot down on that, and the town and the neighborhoods don't have to put as much down. And then 3 years go by and now there's no federal and state money. It's just not there anymore. Therefore, those neighborhoods are now treated, unequally or inequitably compared to the other one. So that's my concern with the money. Like we said, we've been raising for a few years. We've got some money. We got a nice, recalculation and got a nice bump this year. That's going to get us through a few of the projects, but what about the next ones? And so do we use just a little bit of it because we need this money that we've got right now from the state to last 10 years? Or, is there going to be something else in there? And I just have another question too. St. Albans town is the best town in the state. We're unique. Everyone's unique in a way, but we're unique in a few different ways when it comes to the lake. I mean, we've got, I think, the longest shoreline that I believe maybe one of the towns in Grand Isle has a longer shoreline. We have a terribly shaped bay that goes from southwest to northeast. The wind just blows everything in. I mean, everything stays at the head. And then, of course, to feed it, we've got Stevens and Brooks that literally are right at the head of the bay. I mean, it literally comes down there slowly and just sits there unless we, are blessed with a wind coming from the north going south. And then it's Georgia and Milton's problem for a week, and then it comes back. So, I mean, we have the most to gain if all of this stuff works out right. I mean, and I'm not a science guy, so to me, a lot of this is magic. Like, oh, we're going to have 69 kilograms of phosphorus coming in from Stevens and Brook sitting in there. But our water quality is only a little bit dependent on what we do, right? I mean, it's a lot of what's happening everywhere else in at least this part of the lake. Are other communities are they doing this? Are we one of the only ones who's considering going all in and getting this all done? If we did, and we've cut down Stevens and Brook down to 69 kilograms or 70, what different would it make any difference if the other communities don't do anything? That might be more of a science, again, to me, it's magic question, but
Right.
what's the lake gonna look like in 2036? Let's say in two scenarios. We follow through and we hit all of our targets and everyone else in the lake does too. And then the other scenario, we follow through, hit all of our targets. Not so much elsewhere. What, I mean, because I think that's really important as we're trying to collect money and put in these projects. Now, some of them are a little different. We keep mentioning Tanglewood. They have, it's not just runoff. I mean, there's flooding there, so that's a little different. Next level, but those, I mean, what would it look like in 2036 in those two scenarios? Any idea or?
I mean, I think, when everyone does everything, that was the basis of the whole Lake Champlain TMDL, that has a lot of things for not just other towns, but other types, for agriculture and wastewater treatment plants. So that's our best guess of how to get the lake good again. Where things don't happen, I mean, I don't really want to go there. I mean, I think we're not just gonna wait 20 years and say, whoops, we missed it. I mean, there's probably gonna be points that we're gonna say, this sector, ag needs to do more, or we're gonna be doing, or we need to focus more on, creative sites or something. So I don't think we'd ever get to a full place where St. Albans has done everything. I think the other MS4s, there's more like 12 or 14 of them are all doing good work. Some of them are like getting close to meeting their flow restoration plan targets and have made significant progress with their flow restoration, their phosphorus control plans. And I can't really speak to ag and wastewater and stuff because that is ability to, but every town is responsible for the municipal roads, and that's one of our big programs that is gonna, prevent a lot of erosion, and phosphorus getting into the lake. And that's been really good. I think one of the things we like to focus on too, is especially with the latest flooding, we do see more localized improvements and benefits happening because of some of these projects. Our municipal roads folks have been going around and, we see, well, where we fixed things already, that road didn't get blown out, as opposed to, the ones where we haven't, the MRGP projects haven't happened yet. So I think, that's something else to keep in mind. It's not always just for the lake or just for Stevens or Runsbrook. There are going to be more local benefits to a lot of these programs that we will see on a shorter time scale than, it's probably gonna take a long time to get the lake looking good again, just by the sheer volume. 40% of the state and then parts of New York and Quebec go to it, so that not a lot of projects, you have a big lift yourself to do, and that's, one piece of the puzzle. So, I think it's our best guess at this point. I'd love to say we have lots of examples in other places, to look at, where these types of things have been successful. Unfortunately, Vermont is often sort of out in front doing, in terms of environmental protections and trying to clean up. So, and I think from what we see here and other municipalities, it's really hurting how much work and effort you guys do put in.
We
So
can't do it without money. We can't get anything done without money.
I don't have any in my pocket.
I know, but
So I think we just
We'll
have
take
to
a check.
we,
have to like, maybe, we can bring it up. I think I don't want to put more work on you, but like talking to your legislature, they seem to listen more to towns.
that we hired Leonine Public Affairs to lobby on behalf of our utility to stop this change with ag, and no one listened to us. We hired lobbyists to stop Secretary Tebbetts from enacting a change that blew an 18% hole in our stormwater utility revenue, and we failed. We've tried. We've done, I'm telling you, I'm sitting here, I still consider myself to be the third vote holding up this program. I'm withering on the vine. If we don't get some money soon, and 400 grand one time is not what I'm talking. I'm talking regular, large amounts of money that will actually help us collect this and get this done. If we don't get there, you're at risk of us being the first of the 7 current stormwater utilities to throw up our ordinance and just stop. And then it'll be a standoff and a blinking contest. We can't do it without money. We can't take this $50 per person fee and raise it to $150 and then see a business that's paying $10,000 based on their impervious surface go to 30. That's not something that we're positioned or willing to do. If we don't get more money quickly, this program in St. Albans town is at a 80-90% risk of not existing next year at this time, to be totally blunt and honest. And I would imagine if you went and did a poll of all the other MS4s, especially the 7 of us that have utilities, you'd hear similar rhetoric. And this is beyond frustrating. It's the most frustrating regulation that I've ever had to deal with on this board. And we're willing to do the work. You know, we've hired a professional engineer to lead our public works department and the stormwater utility, and he is doing everything in his power to make sure that we're positioned to be able to do this work.
I think the board, we kind of restructured our whole town government around being able to attack things like this.
We did.
You
And
know,
if we-
you're direct, you know, giving people authority to make moves and get things done, and but it takes money. I have a question on the impaired brooks, because I don't, if we did everything in the flow control plan and we did like, say every project's implemented to just as it's supposed to be, is there any chance that the streams would lose their impaired designation and then no longer require an MS4 permit? Is there a way to unwind it?
That is the goal is to bring those streams back to attainment, and then they would not need to, then the TMDL would go away for those streams. This town of St. Albans will always be an MS4.
Based on what?
It's a designation for, I mean, I guess I've never thought about that question.
Because if it's tied to those 2 streams and we fix those 2 streams, what's holding us to that? What's holding us to that permit? It's not tied to 2 streams. Okay.
But Milton was automatically designated due to the proximity with the greater Burlington area, the urbanized area. So I think it's a valid point that the town of St. Albans was designated because of the stormwater impaired streams. So if those were restored, I think it's a valid point. And I can definitely look into that to see if we could, change that designation. I don't know legally.
Right, I'm just asking the
question. But, right, and so then what that would mean, let's hypothetically go down that route. We could, the Rugg and Stevens are no longer impaired. There's no longer the TMDL, they're restored. The let's say the MS4 permit then no longer has to exist. There still are the municipal road requirements, the 3-acre requirements.
And whatever new requirements come out in the next 5 years.
They'll figure a way to keep us in it. Like the long term, the biggest issue that we foresaw in creating a utility is that this is going to turn into just as much of a public works function as it will construction and implementation of design. So
My thought would be like, okay, build these things, generally speaking, we want to maintain as long as they're.
we'll go from spending $500,000 a year to design and construct projects to spending the same amount of money to staff a crew of people to maintain them. And maybe we can be smart about it. We're smart, shrewd people in this town. We'll figure out a way to cost share between the utility and public works, maybe, so that, it's structured as best it can be. But the point is, if we commit to building these things, which I think we're willing to if the money's there, we're going to have to maintain them long term, and that is a huge burden on us in perpetuity. So when it comes to cost sharing and construction, I would weigh that heavily. There's no guarantee that we'll ever see another dime after the thing's built to help maintain it. And that's a risk that we're all taking. So when it comes, if someone in the administration said that, we shouldn't be spending 2-to-1 versus the town, well, factor that in. We've got to maintain these things for hundreds of years now. And we're gonna do that on our own backs, is the most likely outcome. So what's fair is fair.
Is there any other comments or questions for Will? See if anyone else wants to know.
I got a quick, it's just kind of a statement. Well, the first one's a statement. I don't buy that getting rid of 69 kgs of phosphorus is gonna have any impact on Lake Champlain out here in St. Albans Bay. That's just a statement on my own. That's the way I see it. My question is, if the town of St. Albans does not meet the requirements by 2036, what fines or ramifications does that have on the town?
The agency has compliance and enforcement authority that, we have to ensure that the MS4 communities are meeting the requirements that we are delegated to implement from EPA. I try not to think down that route and would rather work with municipalities to try to achieve those targets. And, if there's, knowledge or understanding that it's impossible to meet these requirements by that time frame, then I think it's worthwhile opening the books and figuring out okay, well, what is the right time frame? How do we make this happen? How do we find more money? I think it's better to approach it that way than think about kind of the wasted resources of non-compliance and fines and the enforcement actions.
I think without a bolstered annual funding increase, that's the road that the majority of this board will want to head down, is to figure out, what are you gonna do if we don't do that? I can remember getting elected to this board in 2017, and 4 of the sitting members before me said, let's hold on and see what the Trump administration does. Scott Perry was the governor of oil country, and now he's the head of the EPA, so this will all go away. It hasn't gone away, but that's a mindset that's available. And I would hate to be the first domino to fall. I would imagine if we threw up our utility and nothing happened to us over 2 years, that others would start to do the same for the same reasons. So this is really an inflection point in my mind of, does the state decide to pony up the appropriate amount of funds per community necessary to meet these goals? Or do they leave it up to us? Because like you said, you have to, in your mind, make sure that we're meeting our MS4 goals that were delegated to you by the EPA. In my mind, the EPA delegated them to you and you've delegated them to us, and they're telling us we have to do it and we have to find the money. And that's wrong. If we're told to do it and given the money, that's one thing. But we can't do both, unfortunately. We're a community of 7,000 people with a moderately sized industrial park, thankfully, and that's the only reason that we've been able to fund this so far. But between inflation and all of the added projects that we found as we've gone about developing our plans, there's no way we do it without more money. No way at all. So as far as picking a new date, if we stick with the $400,000 a year we're raising off of our own backs to cover this, 2080, maybe, probably not. I don't see it ever happen. And if it's never gonna happen, I would sit and say, let's take this global discussion about stormwater in the town and look at isolated areas like Tanglewood, Gricebrook, and others that are adversely impacted by federal and state stormwater flowing through our residential neighborhoods. Maybe Band-Aid or fix those few areas and then call it quits and say to heck with everything else. That's where I'm at, and I really am appreciative that you guys came down and heard us out and are taking this in stride. And I know that it's not the 3 of you that are making these decisions that have landed us in this place of frustration, but whatever you can do to communicate to those who have policy-making authority or contacts in the legislature who will listen, please do, because like I said, this is an inflection point with us, and if we topple, I'm sure we won't be the last one, because I've had conversations with, folks in similar positions and other MS4 communities, and these frustrations are throughout the whole program, not just us.
Yeah, I'd like to, we can come back to us if needed, but if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make a statement, ask a question, now's a great time to do that, if you wouldn't mind, and you got up to 3 minutes here, and just state your name and just let us know if you're in the town or not, especially. Yeah, please. Oh, it looks like there's a microphone right there.
I'm Michael McGrath. I live up in Meadowbrook Plains, which backs right up to Canyon. And I've been involved with the highway department about Tanglewood and flooding and whatnot. And then I saw the article in the paper where they said maybe the town of St. Albans is going to pay for that to be fixed and upgraded. I've lived there for 15 years. Haven't seen anybody do anything there. Doesn't fix their problem, and it's their problem, it's an estate, right? The road is not accepted by the town. Is that not true?
You're talking about Tanglewood, you're saying? Yep, okay.
They plow their own roads. Maintain their own roads. Is what I was told by the last town manager and the highway department, so. When they applied to have the town do it, the town would not do it, because it didn't meet their standards. And I object to spending my money to fix that problem. It's not for the benefit of the people of St. Albans town, I don't think. Right now, anyway. And I understand their situation, but I also see nothing happening on their side of the bill. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
This is pretty timely. Kevin Briggs, the president of the Tanglewood HOA. We have worked tirelessly with the town over the past 20 years. Trying to figure out how we can fund this. We've raised funds for this. We've done exactly what the town has asked us to do, to get to our percentage that we needed to do this. But we have found every obstacle that Brendan is talking about. No fault of the state, I understand how it works. But we have certainly tried, and I apologize to the Meadowbrook people. I don't see each of those 15 problems as each entity. I just see them as a St. Albans town problem. We were unfortunate, I guess, to have a retention fund put into our HOA. And all of a sudden it became the Tanglewood problem. Rice Brook has a problem. It's Rice Brook's problem. It's really the St. Albans town's problem. We can't pick up $575,000 amongst 22 homeowners to try to get this fixed. We need to rely on all of us to try to fix this for our community and for our state. Again, we are working hard. I apologize that it may not look like it on our end, but we are. Just to give you a little bit of back history, the town was taking care of our road for many, many years. Was taking care of it. They were plowing it. They were doing everything that was happening down Meadowbrook. But then, because of insurances, they were told they should no longer do that. And so we needed to figure out a way to make that work. So we had to take care of it ourselves. I would love to move 100 yards to my left and live in Meadowbrook. I want to deal with this. But the bottom line is it's there. It's a St. Albans, I feel a St. Albans problem. And I'm really pleased to hear that we're working together to get that there. So thank you. And thank you to the select board for holding this evening. Thank you to you guys for coming out and taking your time on this beautiful night. One of the only beautiful nights.
I know.
So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Used up 25% of them. Just a question maybe for Kevin or Dave, but specifically with Tanglewood. I mean, my understanding is we're at the water that's come down here, the issue, and I know Jack alluded to it. It's not just the water falling straight from the sky, but we're talking about stuff that's coming off of basically St. Albans Hill being trapped up. And so how much would you say, Dave, you've been up there, or maybe Kevin can chime in too, but how much of that issue is
with all the state highways.
Mhm.
We've got fixed, so I've been in touch with V-Trans, I've got four of them working on it with me, trying to figure out what we're gonna do about it, so. You know, the water comes right out of the culvert, gets that ditch, and then it jumps right between two of the holes up there.
Mhm.
It inundates the ditches, it inundates the culvert. And then it makes a right-hand turn, some of it makes a right-hand turn. Gets over to the retention pond, the rest of it overtops that and goes down to the pond.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's 98%, yes, about that, so. On that intersect, or on that access road. The water does come across
Mhm.
on the Tanglewood side, and that is supposed to actually flow down about, I don't know, 30 feet and turn right. And go through another culvert, for whatever reason, they have two culverts, to go back over to the woods behind St. Albans House. That culvert was dry as a bone during the flood. And when I talked to V-Trans, probably close to, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, they came and dug it out, and it helped for a little bit. And he said through frost, it's planted in the wrong position. There was no excitement to get that fixed, to turn it the right way. But I do think that if it's turned the proper way, it would help. It would help greatly. So there are two culverts, one to bring it, and it comes over for whatever reason, and then it has another culvert turn right and go towards the St. Albans House.
So when the state built that interstate, I was in high school. That was a while ago. That land where Tanglewood is was a hayfield. And the state, when they built the whole interstate, they didn't give a, well, where their water went, they just had to go here, here and here. Cause I remember helping the farmer hay over there and getting buried right at the end, goes right along the interstate fence with the tractor and baler, because that was just a swamp there. And, you know, apparently hasn't gotten any better. So.
Water's not the only thing that flows downhill.
Mhm.
Just one more question. I don't know if anyone, it looked like the state built a pretty big retention pond type thing right off, exit 19. Yeah, I've never seen any water in it.
I haven't either.
And I asked this sincerely. I mean, when we had all the rain, because it looks like it could hold a lot of water. I mean, it looks like, I don't know how many gallons, but
3 or 4 from the exit
Yeah.
back towards my farm.
Yeah.
Like you say,
what, Dave, do you know, what water is it supposed to? Okay. Do you guys know what I'm talking about off exit 19? If you, like, when you go, you know, I assume you're all going south after this. When you're driving up the on-ramp for exit 19, right, there's that triangle area. Yeah, and it's huge, but
So,
I've just never seen any water.
they built them in the median heading south toward Burlington,
Yeah.
and then they stoned them, and then they've got domes in there that, you know, they fill up and then they drain out more slowly than what they used to. But I don't know if they're working. It didn't look like they were working on the July 10th storm.
It's a giant gravel wetland and there are check dams and other infiltration devices in the median between north and south. It was built last summer, took all year, probably cost millions of dollars, and it didn't do much to solve our localized problems. That's,
So I-
have to look into it to know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. We can definitely look into that and definitely, ask for the plans and figure out what water is that supposed to be capturing and infiltrating. And it sounds like it's different from the water that is the problem going on to Tanglewood. But I know that V-Trans, when they design systems in their right of way, they don't want standing water for safety issues. So any practice that they put in wouldn't be like a stormwater pond that has water in it, because when that freezes, I mean, that's gonna be a disaster in the winter for accidents, and they want to keep those areas clean. So and water free. So it may be a system that's designed not to, hold the water on the surface. That's what I know from
It's
V-Trans
definitely
systems,
looks like
but
it's designed that way, because it's designed to fill up in the storm and then over the next.
it's
year or
just,
so.
it's a big gravel wetland and Jack, I built a gravel wetland last fall in my office and it's dry all the time. I went out maybe a month after I built it. We had about 2 inches in about 90 minutes and it filled up about a third at that point. Never got even close to the top of the catch basin with the overflow device. They're designed to trap water in a 4-bay to collect sediment, and then it rises to a certain point and it goes through 1 foot minus riprap into a main basin. And then that's supposed to immediately infiltrate, and it takes a huge amount of water to show any surface water in those gravel wetlands at all. And then they're designed to overflow from that point in what I would assume is probably like a 300-year storm, because we just had what must have been a 100-year storm and I'm still bone dry. It's a very weird looking device. It does not look like a standard pond. There's half of my drainage basin for my gravel wetland has 2.5 feet of stone in it, different sizes and different layers. There's piping and plumbing and connections and cleanouts and valves, and they're very complex. It's a lot more than a hole in the ground to trap the water. They're not hard to build. They're easy enough to maintain. You know, they take time and money and effort to maintain. That's why I'm a little concerned about paying an exorbitant amount of money to build them and then having to maintain them long term. But a lot of this is quite honestly low hanging fruit. A lot of what we have on that 15 project list, some of them I'm looking at, I think we already did a couple of them. It's not impossible. It's just, we're in a position where we can't look somebody in the eye and say, sir, you live on Meadowbrook, the development behind you needs $500,000. So we need to raise your taxes significantly to cover that. We can't do that. People will elect new leaders to sit in these seats. They'll throw the whole utility in the garbage, and we'll be having the conversation of what do the fines and penalties look like. We're trying really hard to avoid that, and that's why we're here. And I don't know what level this conversation has to be had at, but it's got to be pretty high up, and it's got to be quick as far as what pile of money can we pull. I mean, in our size community, I think $1 million a year would be substantial and would solve a lot of issues. But I mean, Burlington might need 10 million a year to get close. And I guess that's a conversation among policymakers as to how serious they are. And if they're not serious enough to pony the money up, when we're raising fees for services at the DMV and every other state agency and OPR that the governor himself said he didn't want raised just to collect more money to sit in our coffers. Now, if we can't be serious enough about this, why should we be serious about it? That's the biggest looming question. But
Anyone else in the public want to make a comment or ask a question? Yeah, please.
So, not exactly related.
Would you mind just stating your name and if you're in St. Albans town or not? Thank you.
And, I have a question that, maybe you can direct me to who might be able to answer my question. Yeah, right. But there's a culvert that comes onto my property, always has been there, had its way on the culvert has been maintained by the town over time. So it's working fine, but sometimes obviously it flows, over its banks. And I wondered if there are some improvements to where the water comes onto the property that could help it filtrate at that point in place. Now that we are paying attention to stormwater, when that happens, who is it that I can speak to at the town about what is the best way to help that water stay at that level instead of going into the lake? One question. The other.
I'll just answer quickly. And Dave Allerton or even Sean. Yeah, with Dave Allerton right here and Sean would be your best contacts.
The other thing that occurs to me with all this stormwater going into the lake these days, lake level is up pretty substantially. I'm a little concerned as a homeowner on the lake about next spring. I don't know what we want to be talking about or thinking about as a community, in terms of preparing for that. I know one of the things that I did, was take my hazardous waste to the town's drop off last week, in terms of getting rid of any crap in my basement, because I don't want that in the lake, come next spring. So if there's other ways that you guys could be thinking about what's gonna happen when we have high waters in the lake next spring, please bring it on. So
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Have those, recycling ones more frequent, maybe in early in the spring. or
Yep,
something.
yep. Absolutely. Yeah, an important point, other than just keeping your basement clean. Any other questions or comments right now?
Sorry, I couldn't sit still. My name is Ken Anderson. I'm the chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. For many years, the town has supported our organization with an annual appropriation for which we are very grateful. I'm really happy to be able to talk to A&R representatives about MS4. I've been working 15 years to help improve water quality in Lake Champlain. We've had a little talk about your meeting here today ahead of time, and I could not get the origin of the MS4 ruling and where it came from, and I still don't know. In your first statements, there was reference to a federal mandate of the MS4s, and I know that the MS4 was in place before the Water Act of 2014 that was signed by Governor Shumlin at the park, and then 4 years later, when Governor Scott signed the funding part of it. So I'd like to hear that again about what is the actual origin, because they're not being mandated by EPA. EPA is set goals, and these goals get rejiggered every 5 years. They're looking at what we're doing, what we're accomplishing, and these two bays, Scituate Bay and St. Albans Bay, just the geography of how they're lying, with the legacy phosphorus sitting in the bottom of these shallow bays. Our goal is not, we're not going to tell you in 5 years you're going to have a bay. That is not going to happen. What I've been told is we can't take out causeways, we can't actually treat this sludge that's on the bottom of these bays until we stop the runoff. There's no point in really working on a cure until we stop, the phosphorus that's going in feeding the crop. And that's the point of what we're doing. But I would like a little better explanation about where did the MS4 come from? Because this is not a DPC implied regulation that is going to be followed. And so are we just talking about the Attorney General of the state of Vermont that has control over this? Or is it a federal court? Exactly. Where did this come from?
So the MS4 permit is a EPA permit. So EPA does issue MS4 permits for some jurisdictions. Most of the states in the country are delegated to issue NIPDES permits. So all of the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System NIPDES permit. The MS4 is a NIPDES permit, and the state of Vermont has been delegated to issue those for EPA. I don't know when the state of Vermont got our initial designation, our delegation from EPA to issue NIPDES permits. It was before my time. And so then by being a delegated state, we're given federal dollars, we're given the authority to build these programs and to implement them. And then we report on our progress to EPA, and then we're inspected, and all of that. That's part of our relationship with them. And so let's see, we issued the MS4 permit. Gosh, I want to say like 2004, before my time with the agency. We issued the first MS4 permit. And that was to the slew of municipalities around Burlington, because they were in that census designated urbanized area and hit a population threshold. And so all of those municipalities were automatically designated and began to implement those 6 minimum control measures. Then we looked at our stormwater. We have our impaired waters list. So waters across the state are impaired for, E. coli or temperature or, phosphorus or, all different impairments. And our monitoring and assessment program looks at what's causing those impairments and then develops TMDLs to restore those impairments. And I think it's 12 streams were identified as stormwater impaired, and they work to develop those TMDLs, those plans on how to restore those streams. And in 4 communities, those were in St. Albans and the Rutland. And so because those are a little bit larger municipalities and those had those stormwater impaired waters, the rest of the stormwater impaired waters were in the MS4s. We delegated or designated those 4 additional MS4s as needing the MS4 permit. Just within those stormwater impaired watersheds. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it's got me going in the right direction.
Okay.
And I just am thinking about the way this St. Albans Bay is configured. And St. Albans Town is only half of the shoreline of St. Albans Bay. The town of Georgia, contributes a big shore. And I happen to be a resident of the town of Georgia, and I have been expecting MS4 designation there. Eventually, just by the geography and by the impaired waterways that are emptying into the bay that run through that town too. So I'm trying to figure out why this town and not the other town. I'm kind of trying to separate that out. I hope nobody can get pressed here.
I think it's to what,
We don't want that to be the headline.
So you want me to go? Okay.
What's your address? We'd like to send you a water bill, stormwater bill. There you go.
I think Select Person Sanders, mentioned, it's the stormwater impaired watersheds that resulted in St. Albans becoming the MS4s. And that's one option that the agency has in trying to figure out what are our plans for implementing all of the TMDLs. And we haven't used the MS4 permit in other municipalities to achieve those TMDL reductions. We developed the municipal roads general permit that applies to all of the rest of the state, and looking just at the roads in those rest of those municipalities. And so for Georgia, there is the municipal roads permit where Georgia needs to comply with all of the road standards. And there may be other TMDLs that would apply in other municipalities, and we just haven't used the MS4 as a tool to implement those TMDLs in those other municipalities.
Well, before I sit down, I sit on the Basin Water Quality Council for this direct lake area and also in the Siskoy. We're looking for non-regulatory projects to be done, and I just want to fill that out, because that can be a resource for the town if you have got areas, especially if it's compared to if there are projects that we can be working on that are non-regulatory. There's a big pot of money sitting there in the clean water service provider model with Northwest Regional Planning and Chipping County Regional Planning. So those are sources that we really like to look at.
Thank you. Anyone else have sources of money for us? All right. Anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question?
Friendship on Bluff Lane, I just have a quick question regarding, you guys know Bluff Lane is a maintained road to a certain point, and then from like cost of sport down, the new part of it, it's private. There is a large culvert that is under the road at the end of Bluff Lane and cost of sport Bluff Lane, that intersection right there. it is private at that point, is that something that's maintained by the town, the state, the landowners, that culvert that sits there?
Dave, you
Not
wanna,
on the public property or in the right of way.
So is that obviously, you know, Devon Bridge, Tanglewood area, I'm sure. We have a lot of runoff coming off French Hill, St. Albans Hill, that probably affects him to a point. Now that culvert there, it is in a very steep ravine. I'm sure the erosion is, you know, out of control during the flood time. So I just wanted to see who has to kind of maintain that.
Well, we can come up and take a look at that. Figure out where.
Yes, it's so overgrown and steep in there that it's just, it's something that, you know, you can pass by and you never see it, it's not that. I'm sure you guys know where it's at, because.
We should do that in the winter though, we should be able to ask them to come up and.
And that's,
That would be good.
yeah,
The
that,
bottom of it.
We like to send Dave down in the bushes.
you know, that's part of the issue too with the stormwater. Is that the town can maintain everything that's in the public right of way. But a lot of the streams and the ditches are on private property. And we can't, you know, legally go onto private property to clean out ditches. And the residents and the developments don't understand what needs to be done or that they are responsible for doing it. You know, so that kind of puts us in a bind too, when we're trying to keep the water flowing and slowing it down.
As a private landowner, was my property supposed to have a stormwater permit when the house was built? And, you know, cause I have 5 acres there. I know there was a 3-acre discussion, but that is impervious stuff. Cause obviously there's runoff that comes from my property down to, you know, my neighbor's Patton's property or wherever. I don't know if it, I wasn't the builder, so I didn't get a permit for it, but I know there was no permit had for anything like that.
that's a
Yeah.
good question. I don't know if it's Dave or you want to answer, but you know, for just other private homeowners like myself and just about everyone else here who maybe isn't part of one of these identified neighborhoods, you know, what is,
It should have been identified very good, at least nowadays.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like that's a non-regulatory project. You didn't need a stormwater permit.
We have a stormwater, the private section of Bluff Lane does have a stormwater retention bond.
Okay.
If there's technically 7 lots that could potentially be built on the road section. So there is a large stormwater pond there. I'm assuming that is built for engineering drawing and for a permit. But the water flows in that off, you know, the hill. It's not soft. No, think of that.
So,
Yeah,
so the issue is when they don't build out all those lots
Yeah.
and then that needs maintenance,
Right?
who pays?
Who pays, right?
You're the guy with a house sitting.
yeah, where there is within our agency, there are the watershed planners. And they really work with their local communities to identify projects that maybe are non-regulatory, but that are causing a lot of environmental degradation. I can look into who the watershed planner is for this area.
Karen Bate.
It is Karen. Okay, she's great at, going out and figuring out what the problems are and finding solutions and finding whether it's the funds that are available for non-regulatory projects. So I definitely would follow up with her on that.
So just listening to the overall discussion you guys have had, when we purchased the house a year ago, we kind of were led to believe that when this project is completed, that it was discussed apparently from what we're told with the town to maintain this, take this road over. Given this issue with stormwater, this retention pond at the end of our road and the cost to do it. I feel that the town would be really reluctant to take over this road to have this extra maintenance.
Well, in
Well,
some
yeah.
cases, we'll take a road and we do right in the transfer documents and the deed that the stormwater system is still up to the HOA, even if we were to take over maintaining your road. So we'll see. I mean, that's gonna get widened out right at that, yeah, it's gonna be paved and.
We have discussed that with the homeowners there, that is a bottleneck right there, this
Yeah.
culvert is, and. I mean, I know there's width requirements, the rest of the road is put in for that requirement, but that one section. So my guess would be obviously to widen that culvert, it's the width of that road currently, that would have to be removed, extended.
It might be part of the permit that the pond was part of. There are state databases available, the same for septic. If you go to, I wanna say DEC's database for stormwater permits, you should be able.
ART,
and-
or the Natural Resources Atlas is also like a map. I'm not sure the full link to it.
Right.
But yeah, the Natural Resources Atlas, that's a map thing, you can zoom in there and there's different layers each one, and there's one for stormwater permits if you wanted to see. If there's a stormwater permit associated with that could be one thing, and there's some other different types of permits. On there as well.
You should be able to go online and pull up the plan sheets that, someone like I would use to build that infrastructure and figure out exactly what was required by that permit. And if that culvert's in play there, it'll be part of those plans.
Yeah, I'm not sure that culvert obviously was put in years ago.
Yep.
Judge Austin built his house there, he had to cross that ditch to get to his house, I'm sure. But
Yep.
whether it was permitted that or it was just someone doing it, who knows, but, I was just concerned, curious. If you guys come and look at it this winter, like Patton said, would be great.
Yeah, sure we can do that.
See if it does require something. I mean, someday we may get another one of these in 100 years or whatever, but if it washes that out, maybe one of those trap residents on one side. Thank you.
Thank you. Comment?
So I have a question. I'm Dave Schofield. I'm a resident of Summit Place.
Mhm.
So, I see that we are on the, list of, developments that need some kind of water retention. But I'm curious, when they built our development, we had an Act 250 permit, but we didn't have a stormwater permit. I would say nobody has ever regulated the water that's coming off our development. But I assume now, the town is looking at how to actually mitigate some of the water that's coming down our street. It actually flows onto Sheldon Road and then goes down probably to Stevens Road, I don't know exactly. But Jeff's point earlier about doing something with the actual brooks themselves, like Stevens Brook, I think would be a good candidate to have a large detention area or area that would actually slow the flow of water and collect whatever phosphorus and other things that are going through it. I don't know. The problem is that all of these streams are on private property, so being able to do all of that would be an issue in just acquiring the property, never mind actually putting in the system to do it. So, I assume the Act 250 permit is overridden or is controlled by UMS4. Is that what happened?
If there's an Act 250 permit for your property, that Act 250 permit is outside of the MS4. It's not anything that we are involved in, so that would remain with the property.
So there was wetlands actually designated in the development, but not much has been done to actually maintain that wetland. So not that it affects me, but the interesting thing is that there was no actual follow-up to actually see that the Act 250 permit was actually followed. But It's not something that your department.
It's not something that our program deals with, but, I can definitely, give you contacts for Act 250 and, making sure that that everything is being done in accordance with the permit.
No, this is a 30-year-old development, so at
Yeah.
this point, nothing. Whatever.
Yeah, and I think that Act 250 permits back then were pretty sparse. I mean, in what the language in the permit says, but I am really speaking out of my realm right now.
I can tell you, Dave, since I'm on the Act 50 board, we're discovering 30 years later, all kinds of stuff that got built, and never went through anything. And now that, somebody's getting a title search or something, the lawyer says there's no Act 250 permit. So we're going in and doing approvals 30 years later.
Right, and some of the deeds are defective because of the action.
And last I knew, there was one enforcement guy for the whole state, and he had a stack like this. So, it's a long time before he's gonna get to you.
Dave, just in response to, it's called a treatment train in the stream. And they are actually past square one or square two on Jewett Brook. So I think in a few years you will see, and it goes back to reducing, before they could treat the lake, they have to stop the inflow of phosphorus, and that's Jewett Brook with all the ag runoff. They're making progress on that. So it can be done. It takes money.
Right.
But in a design, but so to say that I wouldn't throw it out the window. I think it's a good way to go, and I think that, we will start seeing that happen.
But something like our development, we have no land in which you could actually put any kind of detention on. So it would have to be done off site.
Right.
And that probably would be down, west of, Route 7.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what the price will be.
Any other comments or questions? All right, I'll just, I'll come back if anyone's got anything on the select board they anything new they want to ask or add, and then we'll give you, three folks the last word. If
Well, I
anyone's.
just want to say thank you for coming up, because as we've been discussing this for the last 3-4 months, and you got all these questions, you answered a lot of them tonight with your slide. We appreciate that. I got a little better understanding, but I still don't feel that good.
Didn't tell you, I'd
You
make
didn't
you
bring
feel
any
good.
money.
Yeah.
So, I assume that the recording, I see it's recording right now, will that be available to us, just especially if we want to take some of your comments and stuff?
Yeah, we're
and
gonna-
relay them.
Yeah, it'll be, I believe it's gonna be put up on Northwest Access TV, if you can see
Okay.
that up there.
Please feel free to
that's-
edit mine for brevity.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be found just with a quick, easy,
Okay, great.
search on YouTube.
They actually put link on our website, I think by Wednesday.
Okay, so on our website and through there as well.
Yep.
That's Jennifer, she's in Jeffersonville.
Yes,
Cambridge.
outside of the MS4. Okay, if you had add anything else, and I was gonna thank you for coming up. As Jack said, I mean, we have been discussing this for, us just recently, the last couple months or so, as we looked at the budget, but it's been ongoing up through. I mean, if we can make sure there's no more phosphorus going on the lake, that'd be wonderful. I think that's the question of how best to do it. And then you heard over and over again, the money part, the funding, so to speak, on sometimes even a bad known is better than the unknown when we're planning, right? I mean, we just don't know what might come from the state or federal government and how to tackle things. I think that's the big piece that would be great for planning, because with 11 or 15 or however many projects we have, like one thing I want to do is just make sure that we have some kind of equitable way of tackling them funding wise, because there are a lot of folks who don't live in one of these neighborhoods. There are a lot of folks who do. We just want to make sure,
No,
as a community, we're.
The majority of our taxpayers do not live in these affected areas, and if we try to raise all of these funds on their backs, we won't sit here
Yeah,
anymore. And
I'm
this
sorry,
is-
I'm just gonna ask everyone else if they could, if you want to have a conversation, you just step out in the hallway. We should be wrapping up shortly though, please. Thank you, Brendan. You want to finish or?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the majority of people in town do not live in these affected areas. If we raise the amount of money it'll take to fix these issues on just their backs, I mean, we won't be sitting here through the end of our terms maybe, and then as soon as there's a quorum of newly elected people, the utility will be decapitated and thrown away. I mean, that's what we're trying to avoid. And that's the precipice of this whole meeting, is educating everybody who hasn't had to sit through hundreds of hours of testimony and reading and redrafting and reading and redrafting ordinances and policies. And then coming to the head of the money, and the money is the biggest issue. I mean, we can work with good people like Dave. We can hire excellent folks in our highway department. We can hire folks in the stormwater utility, which we've done. And we can implement these plans and we can meet these guidelines, but we can't afford to pay for them. That's all it is.
Give you three the last word if you like.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us. We are definitely happy to come back. I appreciate, all of your comments, and I've definitely taken notes and will bring those back. And I'm in regular contact with Dave, so I can definitely get back to him in what I learned and, next steps for bringing this conversation to a higher level. But we are definitely here to, continue to answer questions and to, help out as we can. We do have your interests in our hearts, in the agency, in our program. We do try to advocate for you guys. So I do appreciate you listening to us, and we're, welcome. We're happy to come back.
Thank you. We meet again next Monday, so. You're welcome to come back then if you like. Anyone else? Good, all set?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. I guess we'll
Motion to adjourn.
take a motion to adjourn. Second, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.